Okay, Tanya, what do you think? Let's get time to get started. I'm reading your lips. I think you said, I think so.
Yes, sorry about that. Yeah, let's get going.
Okay,
So,
great.
welcome everybody.
Yeah, welcome. And thank you everybody for joining us this evening. It's a beautiful night and I really appreciate all of you tuning in tonight. My name is Judy Duncan and I am the principal of Rockridge Secondary. Before we get started, I'd like to recognize that we are on the traditional lands of the Squamish Nation and we are grateful to our friends and colleagues in the nation who so willingly work with us to deepen our understanding. Okay, we're just gonna make sure that your mics are all muted, please. There we go, thank you. So we're grateful to our friends and colleagues in the nation who so willingly work with us to deepen our understanding of the history of this beautiful place where we live and work. Whether they are teaching us a Squamish language or enhancing lessons in classrooms, their knowledge is powerful and greatly appreciated. Thank you to the PAC and the Careers Department, specifically Stephanie Jansen, for organizing and supporting this extremely worthwhile session. Just to give you an overview and a sense of what to expect this evening, I'm about to introduce our speaker, and then Jesse will present for about an hour. And if you do have questions as you listen to his presentation, please record them in the chat. And at the end of his presentation, he will get to answering those questions. So now I am absolutely delighted to introduce Jesse Miller. Jesse is the founder of Mediated Reality, an educational company that focuses on new media education. I really feel like I've known Jesse for a long time, as I can recall the many presentations that he gave to the students, staff, and parents at West Bay Elementary. And in recent years, those he has delivered to Rockridge students, whether it be in the careers classes or the law classes, he's always an amazing resource for our school and our district. Each presentation is different and contains up-to-date information. I'm always learning on the current state of social media, each designed to help us all navigate the digital world with our youth. And it helps our youth as well understand the implications of their actions on social media. So I can certainly say with confidence that the presentation tonight will definitely be engaging and relevant to our families and will prompt some great conversations within your homes. So thank you so much, Jesse, for being here tonight. We are really looking forward to learning with you. And I know you never fail to disappoint. So Jesse Miller.
Well, thank you, Judy. And one of the things that obviously we're lacking here in our reality of doing these virtual events is our familiarity with individuals that we've crossed paths with. And Judy Duncan is one of my most favorite administrators in the province. She has always had a welcoming approach to my conversation involving social media, especially in primary. And I always kind of laugh in the back of my head. I forget that Judy's in secondary because not only is she a wonderful administrator, but for me as an individual, I would say that the majority of my experience with Judy has been at the primary level, where I've seen her stop and speak to kindergartners and help grade 7s who are kind of going through those emotional changes of life, where we could see them running through a hallway and screaming at a friend as recess is kicking in. And I remember when I heard that Judy was being moved to Rockridge, I thought to myself, that's an interesting approach, because one, not only is Judy just such a heartwarming individual where she is very approachable, but I thought to myself, oh my goodness, I don't know if I would be as rambunctious grade 12 yelling at an administrator if I had an admin like Judy. So within that, I just want to highlight that my experience in West Vancouver has been dynamic over the past 15 years, but administrators like Judy very much make it a heartwarming experience to not only work with the schools that they've been at, but the schools that they are currently. So I just want to reiterate that this experience is one where there is a familiarity with your school community, and that goes further than just booking a speaker. But within that too, kudos to the PAC. I mean, the reality here is that we're all going through experiences with aspects of COVID, and I, not only your PAC, but PACs across West Vancouver and to be honest with you, across British Columbia, have efforted to have these Zoom meetings and organize speakers and see if the speakers are able to deliver presentations through these virtual formats. And for me as an educator, like, I was already fairly prepared to kind of pivot into a virtual space prior to the COVID reality for all of us. But one of the things that I had PAC groups ask, especially from West Vancouver, is where does tech inclusion fit in? And unfortunately, a pandemic is part of what has had to teach us where technology is a bit of a reliance for us in certain ways. And the one thing I will note for sure is that over the past year, I've seen a very interesting uptick in how not only have PACs embraced aspect of their school communities using Zoom meetings, but also parent participation. We've seen drastic parent participation where parents are obviously, our schedules have changed and our ability to get out has changed. But the reality within it is parent education. This is a great resource, not only in the sense that we are able to do this in this physical manner, but also that the end result is recorded and available later on. And so one of the things I'd like to highlight here is that I've always done these PAC events where a PAC member or a parent participant has come up afterward and said, oh, I wish I knew that was going on. I wish I'd seen the email or the PDF. The reality here is in this format, this is something that can move forward and we can continue the conversation well into next year. That said, this year I've only had the privilege of working with the Law 12 classes at Rockridge. And that is a reoccurring event. I've done that over the past, oh my goodness, 5 years. And I do it on an annual basis where I've very much valued coming in and speaking to the students, especially about the perspectives of social media and where it fits into our perspective of law, whether it be policing, whether it be in our court cases or even our civil law. But the thing is, I can go back in my records and think about all the presentations I've done at Rockridge for students in grade 8 as they come into the secondary school, and former admin have asked me to come in and speak about how to maintain cell phone balance and what the expectations are with behavior. And the reality of it is that the conversation is always evolving. And Rockridge, for me, it's been a privilege that I get to work with an evolving community that not only embraces technology for the purpose of education, but really does recognize that this isn't going away. And I want to highlight that there is a dynamic community at Rockridge, but the socioeconomics of the community do not limit children traditionally in having access to technology. So within that, part of the conversations have always been, our kids are coming into the building with the latest phone, or they are going to have a little bit more unfettered access to the internet than maybe a different community. And part and parcel, I mean, I have to factor in the Bowen kids. There is the aspect too of having the phone on the ferry. But the reality within that is that, we've heard positive stories about kids in tech from Rockridge. We've heard negative stories. And I don't want today's focus to be a negative one. I really do want to focus on what kids are doing in a positive way with these technologies. And then as parents, how to look for the red flags. But for me, not only as an educator, but as a parent myself, this past year has shown that we can run out of Netflix to watch. We can have our tech exhaustion. And to be honest with you, I think even our kids are experiencing that in some ways, because in traditional times, I would have parents who would come to the events and say, these kids never seem to burn out with this tech. They're always watching the videos. They're always texting their friends. And anecdotally, we are seeing children right now actually experiencing a lot of tech burnout, because it is the tool that's helping them get through some of the limitations, and whether it be the expectations of being online for the purpose of education, or maintaining the group chat, or communicating with friends or family through FaceTime or Zoom meetings or whatever it be. There are kids who are going to, once we quote unquote get back to our normal routines of everyday life, who will actually look to kind of put the devices down a little bit more than maybe we would hope, because maybe in certain ways they will just say, what, I've spent the better part of a year looking at screens. I do want to get back to the extracurriculars that I miss, and I do want to get back to being able to just go outside and spend time with friends. But within that, and just keep in mind that we all have different approaches to how we not only address but respect the guidelines within the COVID experience here. I know that the technology piece is limiting in certain ways. And so one of the things I'd like to highlight here is that if technology has helped you and your family weather the storm, bear in mind that there's no negative in that. Like, if you've been able to use FaceTime to stay in touch with friends and family that you physically haven't been able to see, if you've been able to work from home and you were already fairly set up in the sense that you had a good computer and you had a reliable internet, like partially that's part of how we've been able to kind of stay in an even keel in this. Because for those of us who don't have great internet connections, or those of us who don't have adequate technology to keep our kids connected for the purpose of education, that adds a different layer of struggle and stress. And we've seen school districts across British Columbia really stand up to that and say, okay, when things got bad in March 2020, April 2020, which kids didn't have reliable internet, which kids didn't have an iPad? And that's one of the biggest pieces here of the equation, is that we've noticed that there are tech inequalities, and that for children, for the purpose of education, this is a necessity in certain ways. So within that, as we go through our conversation, I very much appreciate the introduction from Judy, because it is, as I mentioned, heartfelt. But for me, this has been an interesting year, because I've seen where we potentially maybe didn't approach how to talk about social media the way that we have to talk about it in previous generation. Because the thing is that we now live in this micro generation climate where every 5 years there's a bit of a shift in how we see children absorbing information and how they're using technologies, and where we're seeing kids more in access with tech. And that generational divide is actually becoming one that's quite interesting, because this past year has really forced those who may have been hesitant to really dive into social media use or messaging individuals, or when it comes down to it, getting into a comfort zone with social media, to be forced to do it because the situation has dictated that. So in that, as a social media educator, like I've done a lot of events this year talking about, our screen time concerns and where we have to really address getting back into things. But the reality of it is that I've also done a number of events supporting people who are well over 45, who are saying, I was just not ready to be connected to family this way. What's the impact on my mental health? What do I need to address? And in that, when we consider some of the perils that exist, whether it's misinformation sharing, or whether it's people believing individuals on Facebook more than they're putting credence into individuals who have done research and their doctorates for over 30 years looking at viruses, the reality here is that we are in a very precarious space with tech, because tech is still the avenue. It's the environment, how people are using it, how people are falling for misinformation campaigns. And then at the end of the day, where information is being weaponized. These are all concerns in my space of academia. So in that, the children that we're concerned about, we have to equally be worried about predators as we do misinformation. We equally have to be worried about screen time as we are about using tech for purpose. And at the end of the day, when our children are using these tools, I'm hoping that you as parents are really seeing the benefits of having a tech-aware individual in your home, one who knows how to navigate the ups and downs. At the same time, also looks for their own self-balance, because that balance right there, we can kind of preach it to our children. But if they discover it on their own, they're going to be just fine. And the hard part here is that, and you'll hear me speak to this a couple times today in the presentation, is that we as the adults who have introduced this technology to our children, the ones who brought the phones into the house, the ones who got the high-speed internet, we really weren't prepared for the big shifts that we were going to see using technology. We really didn't know how to practice what we preach when it comes to tech balance in the home, or while driving, or at the dinner table. And at that point, one of the things I'd like you to understand is that our kids today, as they go through primary and secondary school, especially in British Columbia schools, their understanding of digital literacies is not only part of the curriculum, but it's interwoven into so many different parts of our conversations about how do you absorb media, and what does it mean to watch something online and then talk about what you've seen. And the reality here is that we are challenging young people to not only just be critical of the media they are exposed to, but really understand that they are digital citizens who have a role in this space, where we can't dictate their expectations, but we can help them understand some of the boundaries. So in that, I'm going to do a screen share, and I am going to screen share a keynote. And one of the things I'd like to highlight here is that I am speaking to the conversation point of we as parents, what does it mean? And so in that, parenting the internet, social media, digital technologies, there's so many different layers to that conversation, because one of you on the call today may have a child who's playing what you would consider an excessive amount of video games. And another one may have concerns about your child being on social media and speaking to unknown persons. And at the same time, there are two very similar conversations for both parents. It's the idea that our kids are in a tech world where we sometimes feel like we're out of control, like we can't really institute boundaries of expectation. So in that, I do want to highlight that there are no perfect answers here. Now, we do have emerging data, and some of that data has been compromised in the sense that the COVID experience has really changed how we were measuring kids and screen time, or what were the benefits for mental health versus some of the negatives in sense of bullying and teenage behaviors. But the reality here is that we are actually about maybe 3-4 years away from having really interesting data, because we are going to get some information about how kids went through the COVID lockdowns around the world that really would give us an understanding of what does it mean when kids are using too much tech, and what does it mean for them to find their own resolves. So as we go through today, I would encourage you to ask your questions in the chat, and I will try and find ways of incorporating the questions as I see them come up. And as we discuss, if you do have any questions that you don't want to ask publicly, I'm going to type my email address into the chat, and feel free to reach out independently of this presentation if you have anything specific that you'd like to know a little bit more about. But one of the things that I just want to highlight here is that you're not going to leave this session an expert on social media and video games and the emerging tech. One of the things you are going to be a bit more aware of is where potentially some of our parenting biases are with tech, where we sometimes lead by poor example. And at the end of the day, what we are learning about children and how they are using technology for purpose. And so within that, that right there is a key, is that we have learned that when technology use has purpose, when it can add to the complexities of a teenage experience and actually be something that they can embrace but use in a healthy way, that with those groups of kids, we're not seeing a large amount of issues. Now, obviously, with each individual story, there's going to be certain aspects of tech use or tech overuse that become concerning. But the reality of it is that the majority of children who are using technology in open, proactive, and in healthy conversation ways, in the sense that they're willing to go and talk to a parent, they're willing to talk to a caregiver, they're willing to disclose to a principal or vice principal what a concern they have. Those kids are using tech in very good and healthy ways. The kids who already have existing red flags in front of them, the kids who have behavioral management issues and concerns in the classroom, those kids, when they are given unfettered access to the internet, obviously will be experiencing a different range of emotions and experiences. But just because that makes headline news doesn't mean that all children are doing the same thing. So within that, one of the things I'd like to highlight to you is that social media itself has really changed our human experience. And that in that, just so we can get some context, like if Facebook was a person, it would be graduating high school. It would be 18 years old and kind of getting ready to venture out into its young adult life. But the thing is that most of us as users have only been using the mobile internet for the period of, let's say, 10, 11 years, because that evolution of using the technology had to go from our static computers to our mobile devices. And if you think about when the iPhone was released in Canada, 2008, 2009 was kind of that time where we started seeing people get onto these mobile smartphones. We were migrating away from the BlackBerry. But if you remember the BlackBerry, that was really about kind of direct messaging. It was about email maintenance. It was still a business platform. And so BlackBerry still exists, and to be honest with you, it's one of the most secure platforms still to be used. But that evolution of sleek and stylish going towards the Apple iPhone and Samsung devices, that really did change the way we coveted having forms of mobile technology in our everyday pockets. So in that, whenever I've done presentations, and let's just use Judy's former school as an example in West Bay, why would a grade 6 need an iPhone? Well, that's not really my place to say, but for some reason, somebody had an opinion about that. And the hard part here is, I have a child who's in grade 7, and in that, my child has a device for the purpose of playing a sport, getting picked up, getting dropped off, knowing where things are in life. But the thing is that, with COVID, that changed everything because those activities weren't happening. So we had to institute certain rules about the use of that technology when we're static at home and not necessarily traveling. But the introduction of the phone was for the purpose of communications, wasn't for the purpose of my child yelled at me enough, so I finally gave in. But within that, when we think about how our kids are using these tools, they are right now, let's say grade 7 to grade 11, really the first generation of kids who have had their entire lives shared on social media. And I omit the grade 12s because the grade 12s were still in that spot where we were still kind of on our digital cameras sharing via email as opposed to live sharing on social media via Facebook. So within that, we know that there's polarization. We know that there's issues involving kids and tech. But when it comes down to it, we are now at another stage. And that stage has to be one where we're more reflective of the individual as opposed to kids as a whole. We have to get away from some of the clutching of fear and predation, and let kids know that we have their back, and that when they come to us with a disclosure about somebody who has approached them or who has messaged them or made them feel unsafe, that they're not going to be in trouble for that disclosure, or that the technology that they were using isn't going to be taken away. And at the end of the day, if we are giving our kids these tools for the purpose of safety and communication, we can't use it as a bargaining chip. We can't keep saying things like, well, you'll get the phone at a certain age, or you'll, if you don't do your chores, I take it away. And especially in education, I just want to highlight this. We unfairly give our teachers the role of being the police officer and arbiter of whether or not the phone can be used in school. And the thing is that obviously schools have their structures of expectations of how technology is going to be used. And a lot of that power is given to the teacher to make the choice about how a student is allowed to bring it into the classroom or even choose to use it. But at the same time, I just want you to consider, I mean, I teach at post-secondary. If I had students coming into a classroom, I'm not saying, here's a box, put your phones in here because I don't trust you and I want you to focus. That's not my job at that level. But realistically here, when we tell teachers, confiscate the phones, I mean, those are $1,000 items that we're then dictating to a teacher saying, grab 30 of them and be responsible for these devices. So within that, this idea of using these tools really does have to get a bit of a shift from our parenting perspective as well. What do we put unfairly on our educators? What do we put onto our schools that, kind of weighs down the network based on peripheral use as opposed to for purpose use? So one of the things I'd like you to keep in mind here is that I have my opinions about why and how a grade 8 should be using a cell phone. And I have my opinions of how and why a grade 12 should be. But at the same time, I can't fairly measure the grade 12 with the N on the back of their car texting and driving and saying, oh, well, kids these days, when I equally look over at Taylor Way and I see the 55-year-old doing the exact same thing. So within that, when you consider how we kind of put things on kids and say, oh, well, these kids are doing all this stuff, they have learned the behavior from somewhere. And usually they've been looking around in the family home and seeing an adult who's choosing emails over family focus, or choosing the necessity of texting over the safety of driving, or the idea of I just need to update Facebook on the family vacation as opposed to actually enjoy the family vacation. So within that, I just want you all to understand that social media itself is going to keep evolving. There's always going to be a new platform. There's always going to be a new environment. And within that, the internet itself isn't to blame. We as consumers, we as creators, we as contributors, we're really at the helm here, because you're not subscribing to Facebook. You can literally choose to leave if you want to. The question then becomes, what's there that's drawing you in? And if you were a paying customer, how would you change your use of these platforms? And in that, when I meet parents who tell me, well, my kid's watching so many YouTube videos every day. Okay, but if they had to spend $1 for every video they were watching, at what point would you intervene? Oh, my kid, all they care about is Instagram videos and they just keep posting things. Okay, but if it cost your kid $0.25 for every time they posted and you got the bill, at what point would you change how you have oversight over this? Because if it's only financial, then you're only upset about the money. But when it comes to your children, what does it mean for them to value their digital identity, their privacy, or when it comes down to it, storytelling, to make sure that there's nuance and structure to it as opposed to off the hip and potentially embarrassing for the child, or any other kind of situation involving the school community, family community, whatever it be. So in that, I just want to highlight here that there are always new platforms. And whether or not your kid is a TikToker or an Instagrammer, or whether they're on Discord or WeChat, or they're live streaming on Twitch, or they want to be a YouTuber, this is part of their culture. And that culture is an economy, and that economy is very, very large and very, very, very profitable for those who are invested in it. But that's the thing, is that when our kids come up to us and say, I want to be a YouTuber, I've met parents who say, what a waste of time. Okay, but if your child was playing a sport and they said, I want to make it to the NHL, what would you say to your kid in that regard? Would you say you're not capable? Would you say it's not within your wheelhouse? Or would you say, what a waste of time, I'd rather you do something different? The thing is that obviously with each child and each child's abilities, there's going to be a different conversation to be had. So when we take what a child's interested in and knock it down, that's not beneficial for anybody. And the reality of it is that when we look at the way we communicate some of our expectations, or even at the end of the day, our successes, when we hear about some kid from West Vancouver who's made it to really, good spot in junior hockey and now might make it to the NHL or has made it to the NHL, right away, the kid is automatically a boy. It doesn't mean at the end of the day that a young woman playing hockey at Hollyburn is going to have a chance for the NHL. So, in that dialogue of what kids do with this, just keep in mind that they are inspired by people who have found success. They are inspired by people who are doing something that they think is interesting. And just because you don't doesn't mean that we need to knock our kids down. We have to find ways to raise them up using these tools within the boundaries and expectations of the family home, the school community, and at the end of the day, things that we would all agree this makes sense. So within that, I do want to get to our next level here of just confiscation for a second. I hate going to schools where they show me how many phones they've confiscated from students. And I know that Rockridge has a very liberal approach to using technology in the school that some parents might not agree with. But I will tell you firsthand, I have seen the benefit when I visit the school traditionally, and I'm in the building, and especially for career planning, and all of a sudden there's a screen up with some kind of here's the blog, here's where you need to go, and the kids have a laptop or they have a tablet or they have their phones out. That right there is using tech for purpose. And then I switch to my presentation, and the kids are involved, and I, as equally as any teacher there, have been guilty of calling a kid out and saying, no, what are you doing on your phone right now? It's not for this purpose. But the thing of it is that we do need kids understanding how to find their own balance. And so I'm not a huge fan of going into these spaces and seeing these phones taken away, but I do understand the circumstances as to why it does happen. But within that, I just want to kind of flip this around to us as adults. This image here was taken of a British Columbian who took the photo themselves of them driving on a highway in BC. That is part of our culture, not just kids, but the idea that individuals now have the ability to document anything they're doing. We've created that as consumers, as individuals who participate in this tech society. We are long gone from the idea of taking a picture with a roll of film and then taking the film to London Drugs and dropping it off and getting the film developed and coming back a week later. This is an on-demand culture that we have created using these tools, which is why we have people who feel that in the moment, the priority is what's happening on the device. So in this image, as an individual is driving on a BC highway and taking a picture of themselves, I just want you to keep in mind, as much as that's evolved, other things have evolved, like how an ICBC investigation will include aspects of phone history, car history, the computer on board, what it means for witness testimony to say, yes, I saw the person on a phone. It was a pink case, and I can remember it clearly because I saw them on it right before the accident happened. And at the end of the day, all those investigations, whether it be insurance, whether it be liability, we are seeing so much case law evolve where technology plays a role. So for children, yes, kids are going to notice when there's police in the building. Kids are going to notice when a cop is on the upper levels highway, or when a police officer pulls somebody over on the Sea to Sky. But in this instance here, where police officers were checking for people who were using their phones while operating vehicles, this young person decided to share on Snapchat that police were checking people on their phones. And I love this because you might not recognize the corner clearly, but this is in Burnaby on Vancouver's border at Boundary and Grandview Highway, Canada Way, meaning Grandview Highway. And just so we keep this in mind, the reality that we have police officers whose job has evolved to capture people looking at an app while operating a vehicle. That is, again, part of our connected culture. And again, like the teachers, a responsibility there, but to be fair, the cops have a lot more authority in that perception of public space. But here's the thing, when I tell you that teachers are unfairly tasked with this, the majority of teachers didn't sign up to become educators who would walk around confiscating phones. And the majority of them will say, I don't really relish this part of it, especially when parents come storming into the classroom 20 minutes later saying, no, you just took away my phone, give me the device back. And that has happened in North Shore schools. But one of the things I want to highlight here is that for kids to be able to capture this and then share it and be like, look, that person got caught. That's no different than when their friend got caught in school and everybody would make a noise and be like, oh, you got called down to the principal's office. So within that, you as parents, I just want to highlight here that we do buy these technologies for our kids, and they do see us coveting these technologies. And when it comes down to it, our kids do believe that there's value in having technology because it gives some form of autonomy, it gives some form of direct connection. And when they see us valuing a phone because we can't leave the house without it, what does that mean for our children to believe that something that does allow them to stay connected has value? So today, as we go through this, I just want to highlight very importantly, and this is just where my language has to change as well, that, during the pandemic and the experiences of it, I couldn't imagine going through a pandemic in 1991. I couldn't imagine, the idea of only having 3 cable channels and then 1 home line, or even then my parents working from home without the reliances of technology. So in that, what does it mean for us to go through this now compared to 30 years ago? And in that conversation, then how do we get kids to understand what they've been through and are currently still going through, obviously, because in Ontario and Alberta, kids are still learning virtually. But what does it mean for them to be the ones who change the narrative, to reset and say, you know what? I did spend a lot of time on my device in the past year. I want to go out face to face. I want to participate with individuals, and I want to get past the idea that what I'm doing on this tool is bad. So in that, what I've been trying to do in my work is really recognize that, yes, we did have our fear mongering when it came to talking about technology and kids. And part of what we've created didn't help that process. So what I'd like parents to keep in mind here tonight is that, yes, we sometimes see headlines that make us go, oh, everything I feel about that app just got verified. And there's no way I'm letting my kid have that app because, it's bad, bad, bad. But if I look at the majority of the headlines that do get attention, the good data doesn't get good attention from families. It gets good attention from academics. It gets somewhat good attention from journalists, but it doesn't get good attention from the people who are sharing on social media. So in that, when I share you this one and it says, should your child have a social media account? This is a great question. And that question itself should pertain to anybody who's connected in our lives, whether it be our kids who are in primary or secondary, or even if your children, if they're in post-secondary. What does it mean for them to use these tools to present themselves to the world? But one of the things I want to highlight here is that the subheadline reads, kids are focused on photos, fans, and followers, like it or not. And that's not the case. Kids are diverse in their use of the internet. There are so many things that kids do with social media that really are changing not only their understanding of the world, but also their empathy levels, their understanding of different cultures, and most importantly, how their story fits into it. So this isn't an academic conversation. This is a mommy blogger who has an opinion based on what she sees in her home. And that shouldn't be the way that we dictate the ways our children use technology. We do need more and more vantage points. So in that, one of the things I'd like to highlight to you is that for the children, that you might have in your life who are, let's say, grade 7, 8, 9, one of the things we know for sure is that those children are going through a wide range of various hormonal changes, emotional ups and downs, insecurities in life. And when you add social media to that equation, it is not necessarily the most healthy to have it without oversight, or when it comes down to it, unfettered access to the internet just based on a 24-hour clock. The guidelines of parental control devices, or when it comes down to it, even just having the technology block out certain times of the day, that helps the sleep patterns, that helps the focus pieces. But here's the thing. If you have a grade 8 who plays hockey and isn't texting during hockey practice and isn't looking for their phone during a hockey game, that child already has a balance in how they use technology when there's expectations applied to them. And what we need is kids understanding that in the classroom or in the family environment, those expectations are very similar in the sense that, you wouldn't text during hockey practice, so why are you texting in front of your teacher? So within that, when we understand that young people are going through obviously changes that every generation of young people have, that if you just add this and don't support it, yes, you will get into situations that are not going to be healthy for the young people and subsequently for the school community. But the reality of this here is that the majority of kids who are using technology in healthy, proactive ways, where they do have trusted adults in their lives, those kids are doing all right. And the thing is, we have good data to back that up. This study here from Scientific America came out in 2019. It was facilitated by the Oxford Internet Institute, and one of the main researchers on it is Dr. Shabilsky. For them, they looked at approximately 300,000 kids using tech around the world. And what they found was that, hey, all these screen time worries of all the things that are happening to their bodies and their brains and their eyes and everything else, it looks like it's unfounded. And within that, those parents who were kind of like screens are bad didn't like the end result, because now they had to find another way of justifying to their children that they didn't want to see them playing that video game or whatever it was that they thought was a waste of time. So in that, when we think about what happens with technology, I mean, I can show you any headline, but if I show a 14-year-old, hey, guess what? This professor over here says kids should play more tech, not less. That right there is going to affirm bias. And so one of the things I'd like you to do as parents is just make sure that when you're looking for resources that help you understand what your kid is doing, make sure you're aware of your own inferred bias. Because if you think that a video game is a waste of time, you're only going to find information that makes you feel like you're justified. But if you don't understand video game culture, you don't understand where the opportunities exist for your child, maybe they do, but they're looking for that guidance that helps them as opposed to kind of knocks them down. Now, this is actually Dr. Jordan Shapiro, who is a clinical psychologist as much as he's a philosophy professor. But the reality of this is that he's not saying kids should play more video games and just have at it. He's saying, hey, parents, you as individuals need to play these games with your kids. You need to understand the environments they're in, the exposures that they have, and talk to them about it using critical thinking skills. Because if you're not willing to do that, somebody else online will, and that person could become the problematic individual that you're really worried about. So in that, when you think about some of the concerns with screen time, I just want to highlight to you that we actually don't know how much is good or bad. And to be honest with you, the goalposts keep moving based on emerging data. And because of COVID, because of our lockdowns, because of the reliance we've had, the goalposts will move again because now we have an entirely different vantage point. Nobody ever thought when they started doing screen research, would you have an opportunity where kids were literally locked at home for 3-4 months and going to school online? It would actually take a very interesting sample group to actually make that happen without a pandemic. So in that, the conflicting answers are going to keep evolving. But one of the silver linings, and I hate using that terminology considering all we're going through, but one of the silver linings is that we are going to learn whether or not things like virtual education can help kids, especially those who don't traditionally fit into curriculum. Or when it comes down to it, the kids who might not necessarily have the time or patience to be in a 9 to 3 school, what does it mean for them to benefit learning in a remote setting in a different way? Or at the end of the day, especially when it comes to dollars and cents, we are going to see post-secondary say, you know what? We don't need to heat all these buildings. What if we take these electives or these undergrad courses that really don't require anybody to physically be there? What if we just offer those online instead and start paying educators less? And that might be part of it, because then they'll say, well, we charge educators less, but we're going to charge more for the course. So the hard part here now becomes, how do we find that balance in our homes? And one of the things I'd like to highlight to you is that we are in a middle ground. We don't know whether or not long-term, sitting at a desk and staring at screens is going to be good or bad for you. It is about whether or not the circumstances are good or bad for you. So that's where we start to see the evolution of things like standing desks and making sure you take breaks in your day to go for a walk. But that's part of the work experience, not necessarily part of the learning experience. But the thing is, the language should be the same. So within that, screen time for purpose, we do know this. We know that screen time for purpose is good. We know that kids who can go further than their communities, kids who can find things that they're interested in and get good guidance on it, those kids are going to do really well. But when a kid's sitting there spending 8, 9, 10, 15 hours playing video games nonstop, and school is being neglected, and responsibilities are being neglected, and relationships are being neglected, those are the issues. And so in that, you do need parental and guardian intervention. But one of the things I like to keep in mind here is that the 2020 experience of being kind of locked down and the reliance on technology and losing extracurriculars is that all changed our expectations of being online and offline. And in that, even for you as adults, working from home and being away from the office, we are going to see changes in our work environments where a lot of employers will say, okay, we know we can trust you. So if you need to work from home more often, let's make that happen. And even then, we've seen some of the largest companies in Canada, Spotify as an example. They were one of the first ones to come out and say, all of our teams are working from home. We're going to be compliant with Ontario health orders. And when things get back to normal, we're not expecting these people to come back to work. You need to work from home. Let's make that happen. And that might be part of the future of work itself. So in that, I just want to highlight two things. One, we can't ignore the values that have been tested over the past 18 months, because in that, rushing back to normal is not necessarily going to be great for everybody. But in certain roles and certain expectations, people have adapted. They've adapted to working from home. They've adapted to teaching in remote spaces. And some kids have also adapted to saying, you know what, I don't need this structure that they think I need to have. This works really well for me. So in that, let's just consider how technology has helped us weather the storm. And if you have had benefits of tech in your home, just focus a little bit on that and ask, okay, now where do we find that middle ground? Because we are going to be concerned in certain ways about overuse or overexposure, but what's worked and what hasn't. And the more that you do that, that's where your kids will find that happy medium, because if they see you doing it, then they're going to want to potentially follow by example, especially when it comes to those things that have helped you as a family get through this. So in that, just as a quick note here, I did mention that we were getting a lot of good emerging data. This study did come out during the pandemic, but the majority of the research was done prior to the pandemic, and it involved a large amount of students across British Columbia, almost 15,000 of them. And in that, they work with students from grades 4 to 7 over a period of three and a half years. And in that, they were trying to figure out some of these languages that we have around mental health and screen time and concerns about social media. And, to be honest with you, in 2012 to 2015, we were seeing a lot of headlines that highlighted like 9 out of 10 young women have highlighted that social media plays a negative role in their mental health. And to be honest with you, there's nothing wrong with that stat if that's legitimate in the sense that these young people have come forward, especially if they say, well, I identify female and these are the mental health impacts I've had because of my social media use. But here's the interesting thing is that makes for good headlines because we don't have anything to compare it to. This is the first generation of kids who've had social media as a tool. But the thing is, they're also the first generation who have actively been asked about their mental health. I can remember going to high school on the North Shore where there was no posters in the counseling room about how you felt or come in and talk about your brain or talk about, anything that's going on in your life that might be intimate. The counseling was for, for university placement, for career options. It was a little bit about talking about like if you heard somebody was doing drugs or you had a bad experience at a party, but no one was actively really caring about how you felt. And to be fair, those counselors were all great people. It was a different time. So within that, though, these are the reasons that we're seeing more kids having concerns about mental health because they're disclosing it, because they're being prompted to talk about it, and they're also being shown that the stigma around it isn't what it used to be. So in that, when you see some of the responses from this study is that, yes, okay, yeah, social media can diminish self-esteem. How you use it can have a negative impact. That's to be expected. But within that, when you consider the idea of kids who traditionally don't fit into learning spaces, kids who don't fit into groups of kids who maybe are the cool ones, right? Maybe they find a kid who's just like them, but using this tool help them find their best friend. And that's where we have to consider a couple of things. If your kid is fitting into a community online, it doesn't mean that they're ignoring other groups of people. It just might be the one that they're favoring because those people treat them really kindly. And if you can verify who those people are and you can identify that they're in the same peer group and the relationships are healthy, that's a great space for a kid to be. So within that, just to highlight a couple pieces here is that we can't necessarily think that the tool itself is bad. But for all of us, if we're just aimlessly going through social media, and again, not finding anything that stimulates us or makes us feel good about the world, there are problems with that. We shouldn't necessarily be making that a focal point in our day. But if you scroll through social media today and you found something that made you go, oh, I'm so happy for them, or I'm glad that they got to do that, or when it comes down to it, you actively press that like button without any form of jealousy or frustration. That's what social media is supposed to be, about seeing the things that you're not actively a part of, but understanding that they're happening and being able to contribute a little bit. See, the hard part here is we do have kids who do the doom scrolling or they do the comparison pieces. And in that, when those kids are going through those development stages of life, that can add a negative experience to not only a inflamed situation, whether it be based on peer aggression or based on the mean girls mentality of talking about how behavior kind of goes through things. But the reality of it is that kids themselves are going to be ones navigating it. They need safe adults to talk about their experiences. And those safe adults, if they can't be in the family home, they're available in school, they're available in community, but they can't be some random stranger on the internet. So within that, just as a highlighted piece here, one of the most recent studies that came out, and I just want parents to know this, is that I'm always looking at both sides of the equation. I'm looking for the negative to highlight with good data. But that's the thing, is that we don't have good data to put a causation and correlation piece together. What we do have, though, is that we have great data from great researchers who are showing us that some of the clickbait headlines really do fuel our fear as opposed to good conversation. So this research just came out last week, and this is from Dr. Amy Orben. She is a professor at the University of Cambridge. And this was published in the Psychological Science. And just one of the things about kids and tech is that we do actually have about 30 years of data. But the thing is, there's obviously different stages based on the mobility factor. But within that, that technologies themselves, they're not necessarily more harmful. They're just creating another environment. So, I encourage you as parents, instead of looking at all kids, make sure that you're looking for topics that really do highlight what your kid is interested in and see if there are concerns. So if your kid likes to play a violent video game, don't just believe that the violent video game creates violence. Look for the data, see what happens. If you believe that your child is, demonstrating depression or demonstrating suicidal ideation, what does it mean for your child to be going through these things and then looking for a reason as opposed to a number of reasons? And sometimes social media can play a role, but just because the message was received on a phone doesn't mean that the phone itself is the problem. It just might be the conduit to how the conversation needs to evolve. So within that, when you consider all of these things that are going on, I just want to reiterate to you that in 2020, it forced us to really recognize some of those things that we do need to address with social media. One being digital identities. How do we put ourselves online? How do we need to be more careful with who we are online? And where does that become part of our digital identity moving forward, especially with these conversations around passports and vaccinations, and what does it mean for verification of trying to minimize some of the harms involving us all kind of moving forward. But within that too are digital rights, like who are you online? What does it mean to have control of your digital identity? And at the end of the day, digital literacies, do we understand what we're doing on these platforms, or should the platforms be part of our collective good, almost a utility as opposed to a corporate entity? But within that, just so your kids understand, is that your kids need to understand that, yeah, it seems like fun and games to go online and share things, but we are now really at an interesting point where in the next 5-10 years, we're going to learn how closely connected what you say on social media is connected to the ways that you're being vetted. And so in that, we are going to see this evolution of aspects of social credit systems. And then we're also going to see an evolution and maybe even needed ethical dialogues about whether or not we should be vetting people based on what they posted online in the first place. And at the end of the day, this idea of security of self, I've been trying to get kids to understand that you need to be selfish in these spaces. Your best friend doesn't need your password. Your best friends don't need to know about everything you're doing. You can keep some of that close to your chest and say, no, this is for me and people who are close to me. I don't need to be as open. But in that, the bigger fear I have isn't necessarily predation, and especially when it comes to the physical. It's more so about what happens when somebody has your identification, what happens when it's harder for you to establish yourself. And then at the end of the day, also what happens when something you've worked for now is taken away because somebody was able to figure out your passcodes based on 5 questions that banks propose. But when it comes down to it, you can figure them out by going to Facebook and finding your dog's first name, your mother's maiden name, the color of your first car, all because you post that stuff on social media at some point of your life. So in that, when we start to see people having concerns about how individuals use tech, I do want to highlight 2 things. One, our children don't know how to speak up to us about the way that they want to be shared. They're not very good at emulating their own authority in that space because they've been somewhat conditioned to believe that all you need to do is have a device to take photographs, as opposed to, do you mind if I take pictures of you? Do you mind if I film this and share this online? And any administrator will tell you that they can stand in front of an audience of parents and say, well, we've got the play coming up and we'd like you not to film. But there's always that parent who brings the phone out. There's always that parent who's got the iPad. And so within that, even when we propose rules or expectations, there are people who bend the rules because they don't think this applies to them. So in that, just as a note, when I'm a guest in Rockridge, I'm not allowed to document a single student with my own personal device. I can't take a picture of any student with their permission. I need theirs, I need the school, and I need parent guardian. And even then, I still need to disclose how that image is going to be used. So within that, when we have kids at Rockridge who are taking pictures of each other, whether it be in the common area or classrooms, that's all part of that entitlement piece of, I have the device, I'm allowed to take a photograph because I have the technology, as opposed to, you know what, in this classroom, I'm actually not allowed to document somebody, so why would I do that in the first place? See, within that right now, when we see these videos, people walking into a store and screaming that their rights are being infringed upon, yada, 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 like you're not allowed to film in a Walmart. You're not allowed to film in stores in Park Royal, but people do it because they don't think that there's any rules or expectations that apply to them. So within that, the idea of an informed consent, do you mind if I share this photograph with my friends on Instagram? The more that our children hear that from us, they're going to be better prepared to ask the question in other environments. And just as a note, I mean, I teach in post-secondary. If one of my students was to tell me that they felt unsafe because a classmate was filming them, I have a duty of care to ensure that that issue is addressed. I can't just sit there and say, oh, don't worry about that. That's nothing. Because that person's concern for who they are and how it's been shared in that classroom is a primary concern. So within that, I just want to highlight here that yes, we hear stories about kids and the tech piece and all the scary stuff, but we're all one screenshot away in our text correspondence, our email correspondence from somebody then leveraging it, using it for their own purposes, which is traditionally what we see with kids. It's the party video, it's the text message between friends in the group chat, or it's the intimate image that's now circulating between everybody. And within that, that's where we get to those gray areas of having an image on your device and how it may impact you. And luckily, I mean, I very much, as mentioned earlier, I do appreciate working with the Law 12 classes because one, they're a mature group of individuals. They've chosen law as a conversation piece, but that's where you can discuss some of the more intimate factors of how people use their technology, especially when it comes to intimate images or relationships where photographs might be normalized, but then when it gets used as a trading card, where does law kind of come into play? But the thing of it is that you as a family, you don't want to be waiting till your child's 18, 19 years old to be having this conversation. You need to be talking to your children about how they introduce any aspect of photo sharing with friends. And so did you have the right to take that picture? What does it mean if you're dating somebody and they choose to send you an intimate image? And don't use fear as the motivator, but use good information like, hey, you know what? I know you're messaging your boyfriend, your girlfriend on your phone, but just keep in mind, that's my phone. It's in my name, which means any images that are sent to that phone, I'm the one receiving it. And if you would never show me this photograph because it's intimate in nature and that's not something I need to see, just know that my name is receiving that image. And once you put those dialogues together, that's where your child might make a well-informed choice about how they're participating, as opposed to don't send nudes. It's the worst thing you can ever do. So in that, as a highlighting point, I just want to reiterate to every adult that, being a good online citizen wasn't part of our lexicon growing up. Our children are the ones trailblazing that conversation as young people. But we equally have a role in being a good digital citizen. And to be honest with you, when I scroll through the Facebook comments, it's not 14-year-olds making horrible comments about Dr. Bonnie Henry or politicians. It's adults who think that their opinion is the only thing in the race. So within that, when we consider these ideas of technology use, our kids are pretty much going to be okay in a variety of ways. We as adults really do have to recognize that we did create this space where they are the ones sharing online in their own way. But again, did they have leadership that really took to heart the value of our communal digital citizenship, as opposed to you're right, I'm wrong, and that's it? But within that, sharing with care. I just want to highlight that this is important for anybody. Being a good online citizen is not that different than being a good citizen. Put your shopping cart back after you've loaded your groceries. Be polite to individuals. Shoulder check, little things that make our society work. But the thing of it is that, every time we see a video, every time we see something going on in our community, it's always somebody who's, screaming that they're filming. Yes, we've all been able to be made citizen journalists. It doesn't mean that we're conveying the whole story or have the nuance of what needs to be shared. That's where, when we do have this information, it works in partnership with other information to kind of give a full story. But, that's the thing. We're relying a little bit too much on the tech to help us move forward, as opposed to understanding how the tech actually works. So being a good online citizen is about really doing your homework before you give the technology to anybody in your home, or before you really kind of put rules in without understanding why the rules need to be there in the first place. So in that, again, the platform itself doesn't really matter. Kids are loving TikTok, they're loving Instagram, they hate Facebook. We all showed up there and we kind of ruined it. They don't even like Snapchat that much anymore. I mean, obviously there are kids who still use it, but they've really kind of understood that it's a messaging platform and that's about it. And in that, YouTube isn't going away. But like I said, there's always going to be something new. So don't effort to be the expert on social media, effort to understand how your child's using these platforms, and then have healthy conversations and be the safest place for your child that you can be. Now, as we go through, I just want to use my last couple of minutes here to talk about gaming. Now, I'm not a big fan of violent first-person shooter games. I am a fan of sports games. I play Mario with my kids. We play Mario Kart. We play Mario Family Edition, where we all kind of do these activities with the Nintendo Switch. My daughter likes to play soccer. We play online soccer together. But the thing of it is that gaming is part of our communities. It's not going away. It's been part of our communities for over 40 years. This is a gaming competition in 1984 in California. And as you can see, horrible haircuts, majority Caucasian, majority male. So within that, if you had the ability to have a second TV at home, if your parents had the ability to buy a gaming console, odds are you had the ability to get something in the 1980s that today would still be obsolete, but kind of cool nonetheless. Now that evolution is also something that we have to kind of factor in here because it's inclusive, it's diverse. We have 17 universities and post-secondary education institutions in Canada who now offer bursaries and scholarships in esports. Esports will be introduced as an Olympic sport, as a participation sport in the next couple of years, especially if the Tokyo Olympics are postponed again, because the Olympics need to make money based on people participating, and esports is a huge, huge economy that has not been tapped by the IOC yet, but they are starting. That said, if any of you are like, that's not a sport, the resting heart rate of a esports competitor is on par after 90 minutes with a professional soccer player. The hand-eye coordination of a professional esports player is faster than that of an NHL goaltender. And when it comes down to it, it is the most inclusive and diverse communal activity that we can see, because no one is sitting there saying, hey, look at that kid, they're going to make the NHL. They're not removing the idea of gender here. It's, if you can play the game, you can play the game. Now, within that, just as a note, I do appreciate sports. I'm a sport person, but just because somebody can throw a javelin further than another human being does not mean that they deserve a gold medal more so than a person who can play a game better than another person. How we measure that shouldn't just solely be measured based on what our definition of sport is. So within that, because it's going to that point, I just want to highlight here that our kids are using these tools. But the reality of it is that the kids who are doing amazing things with this not only understand how the game is built, but they understand the mathematics, the art, the design. They understand the nuances of this industry really well. And that's where those kids are finding a lot of success. The kid who is wasting their time playing 15 hours of video games and not doing their homework or not caring about those parts, that is the kid who isn't going to find success in it. They might find a bridge success, but it's not going to be long term. Now, within that, and I'm just going to highlight this, is that sometimes our education system doesn't fit for everybody. And this elder in Saskatchewan really did recognize that his students in Indigenous communities were not prepared for the traditional K through 12 education system that's expected of students. He said, we have gaps in our education system due to residential schools, due to displaced families. And yeah, these kids, yeah, they got to graduate with English 12, but guess what? English isn't their primary language, and they weren't reading by the time they got to grade 4 or 5. So how do we find those ways to bridge the gap? And he used gaming. He found ways to get business education credits, communication credits, art and design credits for these students using something they're interested in to push the curriculum. And now esports does have a place in curriculums across Canada, because we can find ways of getting kids to be interested in building the next app, building the next tool. And for those of you who are like, well, it's not a thing, the University of Southern California has a full Master's of Business Administration program dedicated to esports. Why? Because it is a multi-billion-dollar industry across the world, just like Major League Baseball, soccer, whatever it be. So in that, I just want to highlight the health and wellness piece, and we'll kind of close here in the next couple of minutes and open the floor to Q&A. But one of the things is that the World Health Organization, obviously we've all become fully aware of the World Health Organization the past 18 months, they actually didn't have a classification as to whether or not gaming was good or bad prior to the pandemic. And one of the things that they had done was highlight that games that had loot boxes, so that you would either purchase or invest money for reward, that was problematic and dangerous in gaming. So if any of the games that your children play have loot boxes, that is a concern, because it stimulates the same part of the brain that gets stimulated when you go to a casino and put 50 bucks into a slot machine. You lose 45, you win 5, and you're like, hey, I had a great time. If that was the experience and you're willing to lose your 50 bucks, fantastic. But the hard part here is when we started hearing these words being thrown out like addiction, those were grabbed onto really quickly by groups who wanted to monetize this idea of saving kids from video games. And to be honest with you, there is absolutely zero evidence that kids are addicted to video games. There is evidence to say that in certain parts of games, that can be addictive, as equally to say that you're not addicted to gambling, but you could go to the casino, drop 50 bucks and say, let's just do 50 more, right? But if you're going every day, you recognize how disastrous addiction can be in your family. And at the same time, you also don't really care. And that's where true addiction has to kick in. So in that conversation is an important one, because yes, we're recognizing due to COVID that, yeah, kids playing video games to stay in touch with their friends, fine, right? There's not a problem with that if they physically can't leave their house. And in that, just as a note, kids who play video games when they're at BC Children's Hospital, those kids were playing online against their friends in communities who really couldn't physically see them. And so even prior to the pandemic, we were learning that kids who were unfortunately removed from their communities or their homes could actually stay connected using these tools. And there are benefits. You just have to structure them. And so that's where parental guidance with it comes down to time and effort and participation within this space really is a requirement. Christy, expand on loot boxes. What types of games are those? So a number of games will have these opportunities where you can contribute, so you can buy a box, and the loot box, you really don't know what's in it, but you might get some kind of reward. So what I'll do is I'm going to share, I'll just do a quick search here, but I'll share a number of resources that might have games that have loot boxes, and then where you can get an idea. But I don't traditionally play these games that have them, so I just want to highlight. But when I play like a FIFA game or something like that, there's things like, oh, you can buy a different uniform and stuff like that. And that's not my thing, but somebody might want to jazz up their game a little bit. But games like Overwatch or League of Legends, they'll have them. And that's where what parents need to know a little bit about when it comes to the idea of inline purchases and things like that. So Christy, to your very good question, I'm just going to put here, there is a Wikipedia link, and you'll notice I've just kind of highlighted into the piece here, what the loot boxes do. That just kind of scrolls you through video games and then gets you to a point where loot boxes are a bit of a kind of a key conversation. And then scroll down through and you'll see where some of the concerns are. This is if you saw the Netflix documentary involving, what developers kind of do with social media to kind of get you stuck there. This is the same kind of thing in gaming. They'll say, well, how do we get people to not leave the game, right? Little stimuli. But again, Las Vegas does the exact same thing. It's the fortress of the casino. You can never find the exit, even if you wanted to. It's the way of keeping somebody connected to something. And so that's what we just have to look out for when it comes to these concerns. Candy Crush, yeah, Candy Crush can as well. But again, it does come down to the type of reward. So you can have them that has no monetary, it's just the stimulation of it. But then at the end of the day, there are also ones that are connected. So it's like you buy a random game, a random box, and you don't know what's in it. It could be the best prize ever, or it could be a dud. Again, very similar to gambling in that sense. You put it on, black and see if it rides. If it's red, you're like, well, the next one I'll hit, and then all of a sudden you're stuck. Just as a note, as we go through and we wrap up, I just want to I'm going to skip this slide, but here's just one of those things that I want to highlight to you, that gaming is not a bad thing when it comes to that guided participation. And the reason I highlight this is that we have educators who use gaming as part of the curriculum, and those kids are seeing so many amazing opportunities to not only learn, but participate equally. Minecraft in the classroom, Roblox in the classroom. So the thing is that there are things in our lives that can be overstimulating, especially when, unfortunately, it's done without oversight. But when a teacher is guiding it and saying, let's build this, let's do this, these are amazing things. And so if you ever had a kid who really loved Lego and you're like, oh, there's just Lego everywhere and there's just garbage and we have so much Lego, why do we even buy this much? The difference is that when you have a kid who wants to build something and they follow it to a T, or they get creative and they start planning and seeing something differently, those kids be like, that kid's gonna be an architect. Oh my goodness, we celebrate that. But that's the thing, is that you do need good guidance. You need good stimulation to kind of show you what opportunities exist. And so for that, kids who are doing this in healthy ways, these are the end products that really do work well, in the sense that they can visualize something, they can see it. So let's say you're building a house and you want to see what the end result's going to look like. Well, your architect can do like the balsa wood, mini house and say, this is what it's going to look like. But these days, you're expecting to see a lot more. So the designer who could, in a video game kind of scenario, give you a 3D rendering and you can walk through the entire place in an immersive experience and get an idea of what each view would look like. Those are the kind of things that we're seeing. How does it then become reality to take the skills of interest based on entertainment and then apply it to purpose? Recently, this past week, we actually just heard about the first spinal surgery that was done using augmented reality, where the doctor was able to use a robot and the headset using video game technology to facilitate a remote surgery. So these are the kind of things that are evolving, and we knew that they were on the horizon. It's just that COVID has expedited parts of that human curiosity to see if we can do things differently. So in that, that is part and parcel what the evolution is. It's up to us as parents to get our kids there. One of the things I just want to highlight here that like we do have to reconsider our approaches to how we're talking about these technologies, but doesn't mean that we have to totally buy in. You can highlight to your children where your concerns are. You can talk about the balance expectations, but just let's be realistic here. The on-off switch with the internet is not something that's easily controlled. Your kids walk into the building, they're on West Van School's Wi-Fi. There is oversight there. They go home, they're on your Wi-Fi. There's semi-oversight based on it's on your name. But within that, they can equally walk across the street and go to Coffee Village and get on Starbucks Wi-Fi and look up anything they want. So in that, the piece here is how do we empower them to use these tools in healthy ways, to recognize their own limitations, and also empower the idea that whatever their friend is sending them is offensive and should not be discussed or shared further. Those are the things that really do need to be focused on, as opposed to how to limit the device. Now, as a closing note, I don't highlight that all kids are going through things, but I do want to highlight that you are a good barometer of those changes. So look for the interferences. So if you find that your child is actively looking to have the phone beside them while they're sleeping, if they believe that they need the group chat to help get some homework done, but the 90 minutes of homework is now turning into 3 hours because they keep actively checking their phone for peripheral conversations. The weird thing here is that participation with friends obviously is a different dialogue right now. Look for those opportunities to keep kids connected in healthy ways. And at the end of the day, we have kids who double screen, they're watching TV and they're looking at their phone. They've learned that from us. I mean, a Microsoft study in 2015 indicated that the average Canadian who records a show can watch, an hour show in 42 minutes. It was taking the average Canadian close to an hour while bypassing commercials because they were checking Facebook while watching Grey's Anatomy. If you're on the couch looking at your phone while watching TV, your kids are going to do the same thing. And the younger they see that, the more normalized it's going to become. So in that, obviously with COVID, extracurriculars and talking about putting the phone down, those are all kind of sub conversations. But right now, if technology is helping your family weather the storm, do it in the healthiest way you can and really rely on each other to stay connected in healthy ways. But the thing of it is that when it comes down to it, just know that conversation engagement is still happening. Kids are just doing it differently. They're not talking face to face as actively as, and they do. If you walk the halls of Rockridge, you're going to know those kids are talking face to face. They're just doing it in harmony while messaging 20 other people. That might seem overwhelming to us. It's employable, and at the end of the day, it is a reality in our connected world. But the thing of it is that they do need that skill set of being able to speak to somebody face to face with not only the confidence, but also the expectation of focus. And so in that, each child's different. Each child, how they kind of struggle with their own ideas of engagement, obviously are going to be different, but don't marginalize the idea that they're not doing anything effective. They are quite effective. They are quite engaging. And it is amazing for me to see these kids really doing new and exciting things with these tools. We just need to give them a platform to really set the runway for success. Hi, Tanya.
Hi. Wow, that was so amazing. I heard you at West Bay years ago, but like I said, it was years ago and I had an 8-year-old versus an 18-year-old. So, and the PAC has hosted you before, but not recently. So thank you for attending tonight and presenting to our parents. My phone's been blowing up with parents texting me
Oh,
and saying, when you bring up a point and say, and they'll say, wow, this is so relevant, or like, this is exactly what, what I needed to hear, or what parents need to hear, that it's not just the kids, it's just, it's parents as well, right?
yeah,
And so thank you for pointing that out to us,
that's good.
and yeah, and teaching us as well. So
And remember, if we were face to face in the auditorium and your phone was blowing up like that, I would think you're distracted, right?
yeah.
So that's the best part, is that our conversations are happening in real time, and I appreciate the absorption of it. But that's kind of where we are, right? We work at our desks, we maintain a number of emails and conversations in our day, and we've partially created this. Now we just have to find that middle ground.
Well, exactly. And, along those lines, we have recorded this so that parents will be able to watch it again and have these necessary conversations with our kids as we move towards summer, and with the thoughts of, the kids saying, we've got nothing to do, and they're scrolling and they're scrolling and they're scrolling. So, so thank you. Thank you for presenting in May. I know you've been really busy with your post-secondary teaching, and and we're glad to catch you sort of in that in between time, just as a summer session is starting, I guess.
No, and this is a perfect time. Obviously, we're getting to a point where the more that we have vaccinated individuals and we kind of keep ourselves and our numbers going down, one of the things that's going to highlight here is our summer use of tech. And I just want parents to keep in mind is that our kids are still connected in the summer months, and there's going to be risks to their safety. But they just need to know that what they do in the school year using tech shouldn't be any different in the 2 months they have off, right? And so that healthy transition, and you just mentioned, from your child being 8 to 18. Once they get to post-secondary, next year we're still not too sure what things are going to look like, and you might have a kid at the kitchen table who's 18 years old who isn't in a physical lecture hall, who is at home still. And the reality of that is that things are changing, and there are parts of this that are about that professionalism that's required. So keep it up throughout the summer months, and help those kids along.
Yeah. So yeah. So I'm just wondering if anyone is having any conversations in the chat line, and I don't see that. I just see no, you've answered that. So does anyone, I'm just wondering if anyone else has any questions. I don't see it. So, oh, hi, Judy.
I don't have a question. I just have a comment, and I was so happy to hear Jesse talk about gaming and the benefits of it, because when I've heard presentations from post-secondary institutions, they are now looking at when they're for entrance purposes, they are actually considering kids that have had gaming experience, because they see the value and all the skills that they have acquired in that. So I'm pleased, because we're so quick sometimes as parents to say they don't see the value in that, but there are many, many values associated with gaming. So thank you for bringing that to attention.
Yeah, I think, what is it? The North American Collegiate Championship now has a $40,000 scholarship for students anywhere in North America. So, your kid gets a volleyball scholarship, they're going to play volleyball, they might make it to the Olympics, but at 40 grand in your pocket that you didn't have to pay to a university is going to be a good day. Just as we know, and I don't know how many kids are on the call or whatnot, but I just want to highlight the parents, just as a note, and it's more of a serious issue, but we are seeing, obviously, with kids with the distance, upticks in intimate images and solicitations of intimate images, and it is still a very real issue. But one of the things I like to highlight here is that we do need to get a little bit away from some of the shame conversations and just highlight to our children that these are extensions of our conversations around sexual curiosities. But the thing is that, we don't, and I'll just be blunt with it, we don't have a lot of kids being investigated for peer-based distribution when it comes to a healthy relationship. So if you've got a 15 and a 16-year-old who have been dating for a while and some images are going back and forth, yes, it gets our ire up as parents. But the reality of it is that, there are certain limitations, obviously, with COVID. But the thing is that they aren't necessarily producing child pornography. They are exploring parts of a relationship involving tech. Just a note, though, that for the parents who do have students in grade 12, your student who's just about to turn 18, who's still dating somebody who's 17, the day that they turn 18, they're now a young adult. And that young adult saying, hey, send me a picture, and that person is now under 18, that is solicitation of child pornography. So we just need to keep in mind that when our children are using the technologies we provide for them, that we're having healthy dialogues about not only the way they're using it, but the expectations. And so we had a number of incidents in Metro Vancouver schools in the past 6 months that have really kind of shaken some of that conversation, because the kids aren't necessarily seeing each other physically face to face. So they are finding ulterior ways of communicating. And there's such a reliance there that when a school police officer or liaison officer is, overwhelmed with these files, that we do have to keep in mind that we as parents do give the tools. So we just got to kind of nudge some of the expectations along. So just keep that in mind for those parents who have students who might not be as open in the conversation piece. It is your phone and it's attached to your name.
Great, thanks.
Thank
Okay, so I think we'll end it off there. And thanks, Jesse. We will. I'll send you an email. So
Thank
we
you,
can
Judy. I
do it
appreciate it.
the
Thank you,
old-fashioned.
Judy.
So thanks so much. Okay.
Thank you, Jesse. I told everybody you could not fail to disappoint. It was fantastic.
I
Thank you.
appreciate that.
The time flew by. It was very engaging, very relevant. Thank you so
Oh,
much.
and I'll just put my email here. Any parents who would like to ask anything individually, feel free.
Great. Thank you, Jesse.
Thank you, Judy.